How do organizations, the big ones, the small ones, how do they really know if they're heading for trouble?
Yeah.
It's not just about reacting when things go wrong, right? It's about seeing it coming. Today, we're going deep. We're diving into risk reporting and key risk indicators, KRIs. We've got a really interesting analysis looking at 3 different companies.
That's right. And for many of you listening, you probably know about Enterprise Risk Management, ERM. This deep dive, it's really about zeroing in on those KRIs. Think of them as early warning signals, flags that tell you risk exposure might be increasing. We want to see how they fit into the whole ERM picture. The goal here is to pull out some practical stuff, some examples, maybe some surprises, that any organization can use to keep an eye on its biggest risks.
Yeah, and the examples are great. We've got a utility company, an investment firm, and a healthcare group, all operating in pretty heavily regulated spaces, so risk is, it's everything for them. Should be some really practical takeaways. Okay, let's get into it then. Maybe start with the basics, just for a quick refresh. What exactly is Enterprise Risk Management, ERM, and why are these KRIs, these key risk indicators, so important inside that?
Sure. So ERM, at its heart, it's a structured way, really a company-wide way, to look at and manage all sorts of risks. KRIs fit in as specific metrics, things you measure. They're designed to give you that early signal I mentioned, an alert that risk exposure is going up somewhere in the business. And they're vital because, they help you be proactive, right? Instead of just reacting after the fact, you're trying to get ahead of potential problems.
And it's interesting, that whole push towards formal ERM programs really got a boost after things like Sarbanes-Oxley back in 2002, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. SOX was a huge catalyst. It pushed companies, really forced many of them to get much more structured about risk. Before that, it was often, a bit fragmented, different departments doing their own thing. ERM aimed for a more holistic view.
Okay, so let's look at our first case. Midwestern Utilities. Big regulated utility holding company. We're talking, $20 billion in assets, 10,000 employees.
That's the one, yeah, a major player. And given their business critical infrastructure, heavy regulation risk management was always a big deal for them.
So how do they actually build out their ERM process? Where did they start?
Well, it kicked off with the CFO. They brought in a dedicated director of ERM. And this director, smart move, didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They went out and looked at best practices from other companies that already had mature ERM programs. Then they got the senior VPs involved, and department reps, director, general manager level, pulled them into these intensive brainstorming workshops.
Workshops focus on finding the big risks, I assume.
Exactly. Pinpointing the major corporate risks. They looked at severity, likelihood, how much control they had. And that process boiled it down to 14 key risks for the whole company. Each of those 14 risks got a risk owner, someone responsible for it, and oversight from a corporate risk committee.
Okay, 14 key risks identified. Now, the really interesting part, how do you get from knowing the risk, like, say, regulatory changes, to developing specific KRIs? What was the goal there?
The goal was clear. They wanted metrics, indicators that would alert management if risk exposure was increasing or if trends were moving in a way that could hurt their corporate goals. And the technique they use for this is fascinating. It's called bow tie analysis.
Bow tie analysis. Okay, paint a picture for us.
Imagine a bow tie, right? The knot in the middle, that's the risk event itself. Let's stick with your regulatory example, maybe a harmful new regulation. Now, on the left side of the knot, you map out all the causes, the root causes that could lead to that negative regulation, and any preventive steps you have. On the right side, you map out the consequences if it happens, and the minimization plans you have in place. But here's the key insight for KRIs. You develop them by focusing on tracking those root causes on the left side, the things that could lead to the risk.
That sounds really thorough. So more workshops then, with the risk owners and subject matter experts.
Yep, exactly. Workshops with the risk owners and the SMEs. They actually limited the number of SMEs to 6 or 8 per session.
Oh, interesting. Why so few?
To really encourage debate and creativity, get everyone involved deeply. But it was exhaustive work. They often had to break it into multiple sessions just to get through identifying those root causes properly.
Okay, so back to that regulatory risk example.
Yeah.
What kind of causes did they identify on the left side of the bow tie?
For that one, they listed things like rising energy commodity prices, which impacts customer bills, poor economic conditions generally, those increasing customer bills themselves, breaching safety thresholds, or even just, a bad relationship developing with the regulatory body.
And then consequences on the right?
Things like rate disallowances, having to implement austerity measures, definite negative financial impact, and of course, reputational damage. Big stuff.
Got it. So the KRIs come from tracking those causes.
Yeah.
How do they actually pick the metrics and make them, usable, not just more numbers on a page?
Good question. It wasn't just about picking any number related to a cause. The risk owners dug into 3 years of historical data for points linked to each cause. They were looking for metrics that genuinely seemed to have some predictive power, sometimes not obvious ones. Then came the threshold system. They used a simple traffic light. Green, yellow, red.
Standard stuff.
Yeah.
Green's okay, yellow's caution, red's action needed.
Right. But here's where it gets smarter. They added KRI weighting. High, medium, or low. And this weighting wasn't purely data-driven. It was based on the subjective opinion of the SMEs, their gut feeling about how much influence each factor really had.
So human expertise layered onto the data. That stops you overreacting to a minor metric hitting red, maybe.
Exactly. A high-weighted KRI turning red. That demands way more attention than a low-weighted one doing the same. It focuses the response.
Can you give some concrete examples for that regulatory risk? What KRIs did they actually use?
Sure. For energy commodity prices, they used a monthly ratio weighted high. If it went above 1, say, that might be red. Between 0.9 and 1, yellow. Below 0.9, green. For the typical customer bill, maybe a ratio of the 12-month average to the 5-year average. Again, weighted high. And for state economic conditions, they track the unemployment rate. Maybe weighted medium, red if it hit, say, 9% or more, yellow between 7 and 9%, green below 7%. The exact numbers depended on their analysis, but that's the idea.
Okay, that makes it much clearer. So they've got these weighted, color-coded KRIs. How does this actually work day to day? How's it monitored and reported?
Well, the risk owners are constantly gathering the data for their KRIs. And they're talking to their senior officers regularly about how the risk is being managed, what mitigation steps are working. Then, quarterly, the ERM director pulls it all together. They create KRI summary dashboards for each department. Those roll up into a big comprehensive report that goes to about 45 senior officers. The dashboards show the current status, compare it to the last quarter and the previous year, so you see trends. And it's got the color assessment right there. But crucially, underneath the numbers and colors, there's a narrative. Context explaining why things changed, what's driving the shifts. That story is key.
That narrative part sounds vital. Avoids just managing by numbers. And I like the analogy they use the monitorings like the check engine light in your car.
Exactly. It doesn't fix the problem, but it tells you, hey, something needs attention. It prompts that conversation between the senior officer and the risk owner. It's about triggering action.
And the ERM director's role, they own the process, not the actual risks.
Precisely. They manage the framework, the reporting, the methodology. They challenge the data the risk owners bring. They're constantly asking, are these KRIs still effective? Are they the right signals? It's about continuous improvement of the system itself.
All right, let's shift gears from utilities to finance. Our second case, Wimbledon Investments. Global firm focused on mortgage loans. They've apparently used KRIs for a while, especially for risks they can't directly control.
Yeah, Wimbledon seems to have a pretty mature ERM setup, very structured governance. They've got an executive management risk committee, a board risk committee. There's a corporate chief risk officer, the CCRO, who reports up to both the board committee and the CEO, and also chairs that executive committee. Plus, each business unit has its own chief risk officer reporting into the main structure, so clear lines of authority.
And the foundation for their KRIs, you mentioned, is something called the 3 Cs. This sounds really core to their approach, especially for financial risk.
Absolutely fundamental. The 3 Cs are underwriting principles for mortgage loans, and they underpin Wimbledon's KRIs. It's quite elegant, really. First C is capacity. Can the borrower actually afford to pay back the loan? Think debt-to-income ratio, DTI. Their KRIs track things that might impact DTI. Second C is credit. Is the borrower willing to pay? That's often reflected in credit scores. So KRIs here watch for events that could lower credit scores. Third C is collateral. What's the value of the property backing the loan? Measured by loan-to-value, LTV. KRIs track things that could increase LTV, like falling property values. And interestingly, they were using these 3 Cs principles before the 2007 financial crisis hit. Shows their staying power.
That's telling. Now, they distinguish between controllable and uncontrollable risks. How does that affect their KRI strategy?
It's a key distinction for them. Controllable risks are things they manage up front when making new investments, setting caps on DTI, minimum credit scores, maximum LTVs. They monitor these with dashboards. If a measure gets triggered, it forces a fresh look, an escalation. Pretty standard controls. But they find KRIs are most powerful for uncontrollable risks. These are the external forces that impact the loans they already hold. Things like big macroeconomic shifts, GDP, interest rates, unemployment, inflation, or changes in the housing market, home prices, affordability. These external factors can whack the 3 Cs of their existing portfolio, and that's where proactive KRIs become critical.
And what's fascinating with Wimbledon is this shift they made, away from just having mechanical triggers like if X happens, do Y, towards something more proactive, more qualitative. What prompted that?
Yeah, they found just reacting when a predefined trigger level was hit was often too late. Too mechanical, as you said. So the goal shifted. Now it's about proactively monitoring negative trends well before a hard metric actually gets triggered. And this led them to embrace qualitative measures much more. They realized that in complex situations, those softer signals, the expert judgments, often predict shifts way earlier than the numbers alone.
So what does that look like in practice? How do they capture that qualitative insight?
They have monthly reviews by the business unit CROs. And these aren't just about the numbers on the dashboard. The CROs explicitly communicate the positives and negatives they're seeing or hearing, things that might not be in the data yet. It allows them to flag concerns early based on their expertise and market feel. This qualitative discussion essentially acts as a leading indicator, often ahead of the quantitative KRIs.
That's a really powerful idea, using qualitative discussion as a leading indicator itself. So given that focus, what kind of maybe surprising KRIs do they track for those uncontrollable risks?
They have some really insightful ones, showing how deeply they think about root causes. For example, oil prices. Why? Because falling oil prices can hammer employment in oil-dependent regions. That impacts borrowers' capacity, the first C, and can depress collateral values, the third C, leading to mortgage delinquencies. It's a chain reaction. Or shipments into an area. A decline can signal slowing business activity, which means less demand for mortgages down the line. It's predictive. They even track China's economy. Why? If a region relies on mining exports to China, monitoring China's construction activity can predict potential downturns in local mining jobs well in advance. And very granular stuff too. Like in strong housing markets, say Stockholm, they analyze new housing units coming online, future building plans, local income levels versus condo prices, all to anticipate investment risks. It's about connecting seemingly disparate dots.
Wow, that really underscores digging deep for root causes and being forward-looking, not just tracking the obvious stuff. Wimbledon's approach sounds incredibly predictive. And a quick note for our listeners, this deep dive is brought to you by www.cisomarketplace.com. In today's world, understanding cybersecurity risk isn't just an IT issue. It's a core business challenge for everyone. To find resources and learn more about managing this critical risk area, check out www.cisomarketplace.com. Okay, let's move to our third and final case study, Discovery Health Group, DHG, a large private healthcare insurance company. Their journey sounds like maybe a different stage of evolution with ERM and KRIs.
I think that's a fair way to put it, yes. DHG definitely has a structured ERM framework. It emphasizes continuous improvement. They have clear roles defined. Risk governance involves the audit committee, the board, the senior leadership team. Risk oversight is handled by their Enterprise Risk Committee, or ERC. They focus on risk infrastructure, having the right people, procedures, technology, and clear risk management and ownership rests with business unit leaders. Their framework follows logical steps. Identify risk, assess it, respond, design, and test the mitigation, then monitor, assure, escalate, and report. So the structure is there.
And they have this tiered risk system and something called a MRCI chart. That sounds unique. Can you break those down?
Yeah, the tiering is interesting. They classify risks. 11 are Tier 1, the most important ones. Then 8 Tier 2 risks, and about 37 other risks they track. It helps prioritize focus. The MRCI chart is quite clever. It stands for Mitigate, Assure, Redeploy, and Cumulative Impact. It's a visual tool, basically a scatter plot, where they map those top Tier 1 risks. The axes are impact and vulnerability. And the size of the dot for each risk indicates its speed of onset, how quickly it could hit them. It's a really effective way to see at a glance which risks need the most urgent attention and resources. Which ones are big, likely, and coming fast.
That MRCI chart sounds like a great communication tool. But how do they actually report on these risks day to day, and where do the KRIs fit in? Or maybe don't fit in their case.
This is where DHG shows a different path compared to, say, Midwestern Utilities. Their main ERM dashboard is quite comprehensive. It includes risk descriptions, success measures, which can be numbers or qualitative statements, risk scores, mitigation strategies. But here's the key difference. KRIs are not yet systematically integrated into those formal dashboard reports in an automated, consistent way.
Oh, okay. So how are they using KRIs then?
It's more informal right now. KRIs are developed with the risk leads and the subject matter experts, often specifically for presentations to that Enterprise Risk Committee. A lot of it relies on self-reporting by the risk leads, and quite heavily on their gut feeling or expert judgment. Many of their current KRIs are actually qualitative.
So for their regulatory risk, what would qualitative KRI look like at DHG?
Good examples they gave were things like actively tracking key elections, not just the results, but candidates' stances on healthcare, their popularity, their perceived viability. That's qualitative insight. Or monitoring external surveys about consumer attitudes towards healthcare issues and comparing those trends to the company's own policies and potential vulnerabilities. Again, not hard numbers, but valuable intelligence. And it's important to say, they know this. They're actively working on formalizing their KRI development and reporting. They want more transparency, more consistency. It's very much an ongoing evolution for them.
Makes sense. It's a journey. What about those emerging risks, the unknowns just over the horizon? How does DHG try to spot those?
Their risk leads play a big role here. They're tasked with scanning the environment, looking at external reports, industry news, gathering internal info to identify potential new threats. A key concept they use is tracking the velocity of an emerging risk. How fast does it seem to be approaching? An example they mentioned was biological or chemical terrorism as an emerging risk area back then. KRIs might involve tracking official threat levels from emergency management agencies or even monitoring news reports for related incidents globally, trying to catch those early faint signals.
And there's that link you mentioned earlier. ERM works closely with their internal audit team. How does that help?
That collaboration seems really important at DHG. Internal audit provides an independent perspective. For instance, with vendor outsourcing risks, audit's assessment helped them significantly strengthen their mitigation strategies. It provides that independent challenge and validation function, pushing them to improve their risk responses continually.
Okay, let's zoom out now. We've looked at a utility, an investment firm, a healthcare insurer. 3 different sectors, different approaches. What are the common threads you see in how they tackle risk and KRIs?
Well, despite the differences, there are definitely key similarities. All 3 have a formal ERM process. That's foundational. They all have some kind of governing body overseeing it. They all operate in highly regulated industries, which obviously raises the stakes for risk management. And interestingly, all 3 rely heavily on detailed analytical data to underpin their ERM programs. Even DHG, where some KRIs are still qualitative, the overall ERM function uses data. But maybe the most critical commonality and a real takeaway for listeners is this. Their core ERM programs were pretty mature before they seriously started developing KRIs.
So you need that solid foundation first. You can't just jump straight to indicators.
Exactly. You really need to understand your risks, deeply identify them, assess them, understand the causes before you can figure out the right way to measure them with KRIs. Trying to develop KRIs without that solid ERM base, you'll likely end up tracking the wrong things or just generating noise.
Makes perfect sense. And the differences, what stands out there?
The differences really highlight that there's no single right way to do KRIs. It depends on the company, its industry, its maturity. Midwestern Utilities, for example, leans more heavily on structured analytical data feeding into their KRIs. Wimbledon integrates much more qualitative analysis and is really focused on using KRIs, even surprising ones, as leading indicators, very forward-looking. And Discovery Health, well, they're using qualitative KRIs informally while they continue to mature other aspects of their ERM program with plans to formalize KRI reporting later. It shows different stages of the journey.
So the real value is tailoring the KRI approach, making it fit the specific organization, its risks, its culture, its capabilities, not just copying someone else's dashboard.
Precisely. It has to be fit for purpose for that organization.
This has been fascinating. This deep dive really shows that whether you're keeping the power on, managing investments, or providing health care, understanding and anticipating risk is just absolutely vital. KRIs really are like those dashboard lights for your organization, giving you that crucial heads up so you can act before things really go sideways.
Absolutely. And the big takeaway for you listening isn't just about dodging disaster. Effective risk management, using tools like KRIs smartly, is ultimately about making better, more informed decisions for the future of your organization. And as we saw, that sweet spot often lies in blending the quantitative, the hard data with the invaluable qualitative insights, the gut feel from your experts. Neither one tells the whole story alone.
So think about your own world for a moment, your own context. What would be your check engine light for whatever key challenge you might be facing, maybe personally or professionally? What are those really early signals, maybe not obvious ones, that would tell you something important is shifting long before it becomes a major problem?
And maybe this leaves us with a bigger question to ponder. In this world we live in, with so much complexity, so much rapid change, how do organizations go beyond just identifying risks? How do they build a culture where those early warning signals the numbers, yes, but also those crucial qualitative whispers are not just collected in a report somewhere, but are actually listened to, acted upon, and continuously refined? How do you make it a living system?
Definitely something to mull over. We hope this deep dive gave you some valuable insights. Thanks for joining us. And remember to check out our sponsor, www.cisomarketplace.com, for resources on navigating the complex world of cybersecurity risk. Until next time.